The Stalker in the Silver-Gelatin. Before cameras fit into our pockets, photography was a ritual of patience. In the autumn of 1924, my great-grandfather, Arthur Vance, operated the only photography studio in Blackwood Valley. Back then, taking a portrait wasn't as simple as tapping a screen. You prepared heavy glass plates, adjusted the silver nitrate chemical baths, and told your subjects to stand perfectly still for several seconds while the lens drank in the light. Afterwards, the film took days, sometimes weeks, to wash, dry, and expose in the darkroom. People in Blackwood lived in peaceful ignorance of what stood beside them, until the film dried. The trouble began in late September. The Miller family, a farmer, his wife, and their young daughter, had ordered a portrait standing on the wooden porch of their farmhouse. My great-grandfather took the shot, developed the glass plate, and delivered the printed photograph a week later. 2 hours after delivery, Thomas Miller burst into Arthur's studio, his face red with anger, slamming the photograph onto the glass counter. "What kind of sick prank is this, Arthur?" Thomas demanded. Arthur looked down at the print. There was the Miller family standing on their porch, stiff and unsmiling in their Sunday best. But behind them, standing near the tree line at the edge of the frame, was a figure. It was toweringly tall, at least 7 feet, impossibly thin, and painted in absolute pitch black. It had no visible clothes, no face, and no features. Just a long, narrow silhouette, standing perfectly straight under the overarching oak branches, looking directly at the camera. Arthur inspected the negative under a magnifying glass. To his horror, the dark shape wasn't an ink smudge or a development error. The silver nitrate had exposed a real, physical entity standing in the background when the shutter clicked. Thomas Miller swore up and down that the yard had been completely empty when Arthur took the photo. Within 3 weeks, the anger turned to sheer terror. It wasn't just Arthur's studio, and it wasn't just the Miller family. 2 other photographers in neighboring towns reported the exact same phenomenon. A wealthy family in the next county picked up a batch of pictures from a summer picnic. Hovering just behind a patch of high grass was the same tall, slender shape. A newlywed's portrait taken in an apple orchard showed the entity leaning slightly against a trunk behind them, its long, spindly arm almost touching the bride's shoulder. The realization hit the valley like a cold frost. The entity was everywhere, but it could only be seen in retrospect. Because of the delay in film processing, families were looking at pictures of themselves standing mere feet away from a towering, unnatural monster 3 weeks after it happened. They had smiled, posed, and walked back inside their homes, completely unaware that a tall, black mass had been towering behind them in the silence. Panic consumed Blackwood Valley. The local sheriff opened an investigation, suspecting a local vagrant or a troublemaker wearing a dark suit. But the police found no footprints in the dirt where the entity was photographed. No broken twigs, no trampled grass. By November, nobody took outdoor photos anymore. The local newspaper ran warning front pages, and the local militia formed nightly watch groups. Armed with shotguns, lanterns, and iron pitchforks, dozens of men patrolled the fields and woods surrounding the town. They searched every barn, every ditch, and every cave in the ridge. They wanted blood. They wanted a culprit. But they found nothing. The stranger in the silver nitrate never left a single track. It never made a sound. And most disturbingly of all, it never attacked anyone. It didn't break into houses. It didn't snatch livestock. It didn't drag children into the woods. Its cruelty was purely psychological. It simply stood in the background of human lives, watching, waiting for a lens to capture its presence before disappearing back into the unseen world. By the winter of 1925, the mass hysteria began to curdle into paranoia. Hoping for attention or money, several locals began faking encounters. Scrappy teenagers painted black shapes onto glass plates. Farmers claimed they fought off a 10-foot shadow in their barns with axe handles. The truth became muddy, buried beneath layers of tall tales and local urban legends. Eventually, the valley tried to forget. Cameras were locked away in attics, and for decades, Blackwood Valley remained a place where people refused to pose for portraits outside. My great-grandfather kept a locked leather briefcase under his bed until the day he died in 1978. When I inherited his estate last month, I finally pried the old lock open. Inside were dozens of rejected glass negatives from 1924, preserved in yellowed paper sleeves. I spent hours scanning them into my computer, using modern software to clean up the decade of dust and scratches. They were chilling. In photo after photo, a family on a porch, kids playing in the snow, a couple standing by a river. That same impossibly long, ink-black figure was standing in the background shadows, silent and attentive. I sat back in my desk chair, running a hand through my hair, feeling a cold sensation wash over my neck. I decided to take a break. I pulled out my smartphone, opened the camera app, and turned on the flash to snap a quick photo of the old briefcase to send to my sister. The flash strobed in the dim room, and the digital photo instantly popped up on my screen. My thumb froze over the glass. I stared at the image on my phone. There was the antique briefcase resting on my desk. And standing in the dark corner of my bedroom, right behind my chair, was a tall, impossibly thin black silhouette, leaning down just enough to look over my shoulder.